By now, many, if not most of you, would have learned of the tragic, unfortunate death of son of acclaimed award-winning Nigerian author Chimamanda Adichie. To be honest, I was not planning to make this video. That is, until I heard Anthea speak. Anthea is older sister to Dr. Esege, Chimamanda's husband. Anthea was 1 year ahead of me in medical school back in the days. In addition, Ijoma, Chimamanda's older sister, and I graduated from medical school the same year. Not only were we classmates, we were floor mates in the female hostel. Ijoma's room was 3 doors away from mine. Incidentally, this January marks 1 year when in January 2025, Nigeria happened to me. My friend and colleague Douglas Emeka Oko recently tagged it Turn by Turn Nigeria PLC, a thriving enterprise where the pain of eminently avoidable death is passed around turn by turn. I join Anthea in calling for transparency and a full investigation into the events surrounding the death of Nkanu, her nephew. As a practicing physician anaesthetist, or anesthesiologist as we are also called, I would strongly recommend that the investigations involve not only the Medical and Dental Council in Nigeria, but also the Nigerian Society of Anaesthetists and the expert opinion of eminent pediatric anaesthetists in Lagos. In 2017, when Nigeria hosted the All Africa Anesthesia Congress, Professor Ronke Desalu, a pediatric anaesthetist at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, and other pediatric anesthetic colleagues held a session tagged, Who should be looking after our children? So the first question that needs must be asked is, did the attending anaesthetist have the competence, but more importantly, the continuous practice development skills to anesthetize a 21-month-old in an MRI scanner? One of the first things we are taught in pediatric anesthesia is that a child is not a small adult. If you anesthetize a child like a small adult, you run the risk of problems of which overdosing is just one of them. Let me state up front that providing anesthesia in the MRI suite is challenging on any level, whether the patient is pediatric or adult. First of all, as anesthetists, we're outside our usual familiar territory, which is the operating theaters. The layout in the MRI suite is different, and all your equipment has to be MRI compatible. Where I work, this is driven by strict protocols, and that's how we keep things safe and avoid disasters. Another standard of care is that as anesthetists, we do not go unaccompanied to the MRI suite to provide anesthetic support. We are always accompanied by an operating department practitioner, also called an operating department assistant, also called the anesthetist's right-hand man and or woman. This is the same standard of care that I met when I started my anesthesia training in Lagos University Teaching Hospital in 1997. We did not provide anesthesia solo in what were tagged the remote areas of the hospital. We were always accompanied by ODPs. And so my second question would be, was this anesthetist accompanied by a competent ODP to provide anesthesia support in the MRI suite? If a child is old enough to manifest separation anxiety, which a 21-month-old is, then usually the starting plan would be to give the child a general anesthetic, secure their breathing passage, stabilize them on the anesthetic machine or whatever the mode of delivery of the anesthesia is, and the monitors, before putting the child into the scanner, before starting the MRI scan. The MRI scanner is claustrophobic, even for adults. I don't want to compare because it's not my intention to upset anyone, but where I work, even children who are not medically compromised coming in for MRI scans get put to sleep in a controlled fashion before even starting the MRI scan. What you don't want happening as an anesthetist is for the child to stop breathing during the scan, because during the scan, you are quite a distance away from the patient behind that screen looking in. If the child was sedated, was their breathing passage secured? That's the question I would ask. If the breathing passage was not secured, then what form of monitoring was in place to ensure that the sedation did not depress breathing? Because once the breathing is depressed, oxygen is no longer delivered to the heart. In a child who is already sick, sooner rather than later, that heart will stop beating. And that's when you encounter a pulseless child. It started with the breath. Anthea states that her nephew was scheduled to have a lumbar puncture and a central line put in after the MRI scan. These are painful procedures, which a 21-month-old is unlikely to tolerate without wriggling about and screaming. Each of these procedures is an independent indication to put the child to sleep. So I'm asking, if this was the plan, why wasn't the child put to sleep right from the start? And to again put things in context, because I am Luth trained. In 1997, when children were brought to the operating theatres for their operations, as anaesthetists, we were not allowed to put cannula in an awake child. Professor Fuscrap or Professor Kushimo, herself a pediatric anaesthetist, would literally take your head off if you were caught doing that. It was considered inhumane. The child was brought to theatre. You put the child to sleep first. Then you put in your cannula. Then you continued your anesthetic. And then you let the surgeon know when they could start. That was in 1997. That is how we were trained. So, have we walked backwards? Or how else does one describe this? Because from the prevailing narrative, this appears to be an anesthesia-related tragedy. And so our specialty is under scrutiny, whether we like it or not. To my contemporaries, Anthea, Ijoma, Uche, Ndono, Ndo, I am so sorry for your loss. To Chimamanda and husband, I can only pray that you find the strength to heal from this trauma. I wish I could end this by saying Ozemena. That is the Igbo word for may it never happen again. But as my friend and colleague Douglas Emeka Oko reminds me, if we do not all unite with all our strength to fight back at the fundamental reason why the healthcare and other systems in our country are collapsing, then Ozemena will remain a wish made in vain.